Hey there, Vincent.
Hello. Yeah, I'm on. Yep.
Yeah, we probably don't
What
have
would you
much
like
to
to work
do.
on today, Mr. Mitchell?
I don't think we have a whole lot to do today. We've been busy over in the working group, getting stuff happening over there.
Good. I wish I could join that call more often. For whatever reason, my Tuesdays tend to be much busier than my Thursdays, but so it goes. So that's what's the current status? Because I've actually had two different things pop up here lately. One, I think one on my team will actually start putting more hands on, which I'm looking forward to, on kind of like the pushing and pulling objects, signatures, whatever. So like actually using some of the stuff. And then another where I had somebody reach out from Red Hat that was doing some unified content delivery something. Anyhow, it sounded very much down the same path as like the references working group. And I was like, you should go get involved in this.
Yeah. And I've also been seeing like the CNCF secure supply chain working group stuff they've been doing. They mentioned this as well. They're saying, hey, we need to start attaching all these signatures and SBOMs as we deliver these things, but it's not really happening out in the wild too much yet. And so a lot of that may change with this work. So far, we kind of went through, got our list of requirements and a little rough idea of what we're doing. Hey there, Tiana. And we're starting to throw proposals out there right now.
And link to that CNCF group?
To the CNCF group? Yeah. It's like their working group within the security team. Within tag security. I'll find it for you and get that posted.
It'd probably be good if we do have any, I mean, obviously low overlap in that space, but even if like they have a placeholder for us to say statuses and like, if there's requirements and whatnot from one to the other, because obviously I think container registries and manifest of objects is going to heavily be leveraged in one way or the other. So I don't want, I just don't want the two things to be functioning independent of each other.
Yeah, and they're also over in the CNCF Slack. They've got a channel over there as well for that working group. Been a little bit busy lately just because they're almost done getting their white paper finished. They just had a CFP on their, or a call request for comments, RFC, on their white paper they're putting out. So they're busy right now taking all those comments and hopefully getting that paper finalized. But otherwise, on the working group, a couple proposals sitting out there, and we started going through the one this past week on Tuesday about the first proposal saying, do absolutely nothing. And what can we make happen within an existing registry, just using like the tags that have the digest in them and using OCI artifacts as they are today. And so next few weeks, hopefully we'll start going into some of these other proposals that are saying, let's actually change a whole bunch of stuff and then see what more that'll give us. So a lot of digging through those. It's feeling a little productive though. We're actually digging into the meat of what I was hoping to get into with that working group, which was, hey, let's take a look at all the options we've got and start making some decisions here.
Nice. I should have put the heck in D.
Yeah, I'll be curious what comes out of that working group. What kind of decisions we can make, because I've got my opinions, but there's always everybody with everybody else's opinions. And so it's just
They like
How do we
belly
come to a nice?
buttons. Everybody's
What's
got
that?
one. I said they like belly buttons. Everybody's got an opinion, and you think everybody else stinks.
I think there are pros and cons to each. I don't necessarily think they all stink. I just think that there are goods and bads to each. I also think each of us are coming in with different things that we want as our core priority versus a nice to have.
Let's see. Oh, I just messed up your game. You're on mute. Don't get the pleasure here.
You're trying to make us one of the same.
Complain.
Like we can't be on the same line. We can be on the same page, but not on the same
It is
line.
pretty rough when you like press delete, right? When somebody's collaboratively trying to.
I've discovered that HackMD does have its concurrency challenges, not unlike us working in registries.
And when a document gets long, it makes my browser go brrr.
Are we at that point that we should probably?
We could probably archive
Archive.
2021.
Yeah,
I think a quarter of the way into the year, we can archive the previous year. It's like taxes.
that reminds me.
Worst reminder. CNCF.
So Tiana and I was just saying that I was feeling like our working group was feeling productive. Is that feeling consistent on your side as well?
I think so. There's a lot of communication happening, which is definitely more
encouraging.
productive than this conversation has been for years. So
Yeah,
It's been pretty stale for a year, or like non-productive for a while.
people getting their stalemates with each other. No, yours can't get approved because I want mine to get approved.
Oh, humans.
We can be difficult like that. So cool. I don't have much else to really talk about unless you got questions for me. I am keeping my general agenda that I keep pushing to try to get the OCI layout visible in a lot of places, the file system layout.
The image
In a
layout?
lot of places. Yeah. I'm a fan of that. I'd like to see it used in more places.
Well, that's interesting. I did just have a Tianan would probably appreciate this also, but I just had like a small fever dream the other day where I was trying to fetch and unpack an image, and I was like stuck between the capabilities of Scopio and Umochi, and then what the Crane project can do, and like which ones actually support like an OCI image layout versus like what you would effectively Docker save output something and like how different they were. And sometimes they'll actually operate on it, even if they don't actually support.
You
Like
can
if you
output a an OCI image layout that has the files needed for both the layout and the Docker load. And the Docker load will just import the file.
with which tool?
I've done it in my own reg client. I think other people mentioned they've done it too.
I've done it by hand in other places, but I was just like at this situation.
CTR and NerdCuddle both support it.
Do what?
CTR and NerdCuddle both support it.
And what in NerdCuddle load or save?
Yeah.
Yeah, because all you need is one extra manifest JSON file in there that has the right pointers.
Yeah. Okay. Then I'll have to go back to where I was, because I was Scopio copying something, and anyhow, I was actually trying to unpack a file system, and I was really frustrated by the fact that some of the tools will silently think that they will silently act like they've worked, but it's because they're expecting like a Docker image layout, like a Docker save layout, but not an OCI image layout. And so it'll repackage something that looks like what you want, but the contents of each tar layer is just the tar balls of the prior thing. Like they don't fail because they didn't get what they're expecting. It will try and do its best job. Anyhow, I ended up down a rabbit hole, and it was not what I was prepared to do that afternoon. So I just had to stop and move on to something else.
There's also the Docker import export, which is different from the load and save.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to get to, is basically just an export, not a save.
Because the save is an image. That's the one that's compatible.
Layout more often.
I'd like to see layout in a lot of the stuff we've been working on, especially in CI pipelines. I'd like to see us between the different stages of the pipeline, keep the layout local, and then once you get to the last step, say, okay, now we've generated our SBOM, done our signing, all the other steps in there, done our security scan. Now we've done all that stuff on this file or this directory of files. Now push it to the registry. So kind of looking in that direction for some stuff.
So wouldn't that just be going to those places and either proposing or opening trackers for those issues, or what?
Yeah, it probably needs me going into various individual projects and saying, hey, it would be nice if you could do that with a layout too. I've been pushing also on the reference type group. I've got an issue open over there saying, hey, we might have missed one of our items here that we need to be able to generate the reference type that can be exported to a layout, because people that do air gap networks are going to take this stuff across in a file format that's on disk, not on a registry.
Yep. I think one of the things that I don't like about that I think some of the tools at the time that we first worked on that, probably don't do I think that one of the conversations that would probably have to be revisited, and this would probably, if you had even a small write-up of how you've interacted with it or seen it done, is that people were still very focused on the tags, like the Docker tag or something like that. So when we have stuff exported to a layout, it expects this annotation, this like clunky annotation field to be like the tag name. So even like in that situation that, again, just a couple of weeks ago, Emoji like won't operate on it unless it has a tag. It won't be like, actually, no, it's this digest. So if you're not even using tags, if you're only in a digest workflow, making sure that has continuity in that workflow if you're just only referencing digests, because some of the tools actually won't even be able to reference it unless you have that annotation tag in there.
Yeah, I've been treating it just like a repository. So I do put the tag in there. What gets interesting is when you take like a multi-platform image. In that case, you're going to have multiple manifests. I don't want to put each of those in the index. I only want to put the top level tag in there and not each individual one. So that gets interesting of whether I keep track of just the tag or each manifest digest. And then if I don't keep track of each manifest digest, I've also been working on garbage collection in there. And so making sure I don't garbage collect something if I copy it by digest. So then I do actually need to put an entry in the index if I take just the digest and not the tag itself. A lot of edge cases in there to worry about. Yeah, another place I've been using is if I want to do image modification, pull an image down, do some tweaks to it with some automated tooling, is that I tweak the image and then re-push it back into my little OCI layout. And then I can push that up, but then keeping track of, okay, I modified this stuff. These are the layers that are safe to delete now because I've replaced them.
Still kind of a GC story, but yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a link to that?
That is a lot of stuff within Reg Client. The modification stuff is still coming, not too distant future. Which that I've been having fun with just because I'm looking at, is it possible to take a Docker build with a Docker file that is inherently not reproducible? You've got timestamps and other stuff in there, and backtrack that into something that is reproducible, strip out the timestamps, pull out any layers that shouldn't have been in there, that kind of fun stuff. Oh, Reggae Client. Man, I missed a good name typo there. I should register that. Hey there, Mike.
How's it going?
Going good. I like that hat. Do I need to go to like an IBM store to pick that up?
We're having crazy hat day.
Yep.
We can send you a developer.com hat if you'd like.
Okay, VBATs, how the heck did you get that to happen? No, you had a typo there. I pulled the typo out. It's just Reg Client. That's where I was saying I needed to register Reggae Client. Now you're on mute, but
That would be sweet. Mike, I talked to Doug Davis this week.
Oh, really? Yep. He just jumped ship.
He's on my team now. No, he's not on my team.
I hadn't seen the announce for where he was going yet, but yeah. It's a small world, Ben.
I know.
It's a small world. Oh, wait, Vince, where are you now?
I don't know, man. I've been sitting at home for 2 years.
I know. It's like, okay.
I've worked for 3 companies and I've been at home for 2 years. So
Yeah. It's a small world here, right? I love open source.
what are you saying, Brendan?
I didn't want to derail your conversation there. If we're looking for other stuff to chat about, I've always got my sore spot, which I'm thinking that at some point we might want to define the spec for authentication.
Yes.
Look, that's fighting.
How best can we have that conversation? Because I mean, like, people have obviously been touchy about it. Mostly back in the the heavy Docker days, but how best could we tackle that? Because I think a lot of people have just emulated certain patterns, so it'd have to be like effectively defining how folks do things, which is somewhat in the Docker auth docs, but then if people want to like improve on that or like venture out from it, then it'd have to be a way to break it. It's been a pain point for a long time. Here recently, I was even ranting to Tianan and John about it because I was going through and overhauling completely personal, non big enterprise nonsense, but it occurred to me just the extent to which if you have effectively a read only, well, not really. Say you have if you don't have auth implemented from the very beginning, and say you wanted to only have auth for push, put, post kind of thing. If you wanted to have a mostly read only but public registry, and it only authed once somebody tried to put or post or delete or update or whatever patch, there's no workflow that would redirect them back to the first step where they do the first get, where it first hands off the token. And so basically, if you ever wanted to have auth, even for if they were read only, it has to be in place from the very first request. And it's kind of a funny workflow. So like in my situation, I was trying to just put a load balancer to where it's like, if it's a get, just go over to this path. And as soon as they try and put post delete, go to this other path to handle auth, like HTTP auth or anything like that. And it's completely broken on the Docker registry workflow. You can't do that.
Yeah. I've even just like, I think it was this past week, Docker's Hub broke their auth, and that was a fun one to get fixed frantically. But it was one of those workflows where I think Containerd was used to doing it one way, Docker was used to testing a different way. And it was just keeping those all sorted out of, they didn't even realize there were test cases they were missing because people do this different ways. And one of them that gets me is if you authenticate to push to one repository, and then from your same client, you say, okay, now I want to go push to the second repository. Can you reuse authentication tokens? Do you have to make a separate authentication handler just for that other repository? There are a lot of edge cases out there that I've found challenges. People implement it differently. The one you're talking about, though, Vince, was it's for me. For other people talking to me, they call it lazy authentication, where they just hit the query, see what happens, and if the get or the put comes back and says, "Hey, you needed to authenticate on this thing," that's when they get the header and they say, "Okay, now I need to do it. Let me go ahead and send the request to the bearer."
Right, a redirect would be fine. Like,
yeah,
but it just gives a 403. It doesn't actually say, "Here, go over here to get this token." That has to be done.
Yeah,
handled all the way in the very beginning.
Yeah, so it's important that you get the right return back, the header back that says, hey, you just need to be authenticated before you do that request. But then different registries handled the extending your auth differently. All friends here, so I'm not going to call it names, especially because people I would call it names for aren't here to defend themselves. But I've seen a challenge where if I'm already logged in for one repository and then I try to reuse that to access a different repository, it just throws an immediate access denied, not a please authenticate with this new scope. And so a lot of the tooling out there, surprisingly, goes with the Docker workflow where they assume that the client is adding the scope and updating the scope and defining the scope rather than just using regular HTTP semantics of, hey, whatever the web server told me to authenticate with, let me use that instead of making it up myself.
Yeah, we've had problems with that in Containerd. Like we've tried to start off with, we're not going to touch the scope. But yeah, as soon as you want to do stuff like cross repository mounts and stuff like that, there's no way to do that without touching the scope. It's like, yeah, I don't think most registries would even give you a correct like scope to say, hey, you need to read from here and write from here if you want to be able to do this operation. So, yeah, it's a little tricky, but at the same time, like, how do you go about mandating what a token should be, or like how the scope should be? So it's hard.
It is. It's very hard.
So we have another, there used to be an older issue, but I'm seeing this like this one that was only opened in 2020. Let me-
And what gets
I think we
interesting
need
is
to- I think we need a new tracker to kind of like, I don't know.
yeah, it's interesting just because we actually do a compliance test against your auth, but that just, if it works, great. If it doesn't, or if you don't have an auth, then the compliance test just passes.
And most of the complaints that it seems you had, we're talking about, are mostly related to like, what is a scope and like, how is that defined for different operations? Like, that might be something that's reasonable to define within the scope of OCI. In terms of like mandating like how tokens and stuff work, like that's not something we want to get into. But yeah, I think what we're seeing, at least from what actually exists today, is that scopes are something that, you know, clients inject. Therefore, like, there's an unwritten understanding between like what a scope actually means between a registry and a client.
I would be a fan of letting the registry tell me what my scope should be instead of me presupposing what my scope should be and me preemptively doing the auth. But I think we're in a world where I'm too late for that battle.
I don't think it's too late. We've got a lot of problems to solve around authentication. And I think there's definitely some caps that we're trying to do in Kubernetes that's going maybe will affect some of this. I think we do need to talk about security of the containers and the tags and the images that we're storing, how they get expanded, how you run containers. What is the lifespan of those container images? What does auth mean, right? Does auth mean that you can pull it and then do whatever you want with it? Or you can only pull it and it's encrypted? Is there some concept of, policies? I think is important both for caching and for being able to mirror, et cetera, right? It might make sense for us to define some patterns, maybe Vince and Derek and Brandon, that we can proffer as suggestions at the OCI level. If you pull an image with this auth, that you could find out from the originator, maybe, what kinds of cache policies were requested for that image. Otherwise, Kubernetes guys are going to figure this out on their own, right? And handle it in their own policy. And there'll be this constant sync disconnect between what Kubernetes users think is the policies of images and what the original developer of the images was, were when they pushed it to a private repo.
It'll also get interesting now.
Mike,
Now that
do you have links to some of those discussions, Mike? Can you share anything?
Yeah, I can share some. I've got a cap I'm doing for ensure secret pulled images. I'm working with Murnau. I don't think he's here today. To trying to work that out as well. But yeah, let me get you a link.
Yeah, I'd be really curious if there are cases today of registries just doing something completely different than everyone else is doing in terms of like how we define these scopes. I think that is relevant here. Like, one of my largest complaints about the way Kubernetes does auth today is that it's not scoped, like the credentials and everything are not scoped before they get through the full Kubernetes API. So like most of the time you can use these credentials that are being used even to do push operations, which to me is a significant flaw in the design. But we don't really have a way today to say, well, I guess we kind of do in the way we tried to define some of the auth and tokens of getting like long-lived tokens or refresh tokens that are scope, but I don't think anybody does that today. I think every registry is doing their own thing, or like having specific poll only credentials and stuff like that.
I think it's also going to be interesting as we approve now the extensions proposal. When you do auth into an extension, could that extension add more than just push or pull? It might want to have extension
Update the scope.
specific permissions.
That's an interesting point. So those two issues, it looks like mostly the probably 240 is almost a better one, because it looks like as we're redoing the distribution spec to go for the V1, that Delitsky opened that one as a kind of a tracker of, so we don't lose track of the references to, you know, teasing out auth and authentication authorization. But probably something between the two of those of like just the technical details of that 110 issue, like how to appease the Docker token piece of it, the scope, and then what effectively how to get conformance on those. I'm all for it because it's basically, I think it was one of those that a few of the folks involved just got tired of having any backlash anytime they brought up auth, so we stopped talking about it. There's no reason why it shouldn't be specified.
New guy in the room that doesn't mind a little bit of backlash.
Well, I mean, but I think enough of us been around that hopefully we've forgotten.
There we go.
There's some 5 chats. Yeah, the first rule of auth is we don't talk about auth. No.
Yeah, I think I was basically just trying to point out there's a couple of parts to auth, right? One is how do you get it? And the other is what do you do with it when you have it? Right. And I think we can definitely help describe both sides of that, or at least maybe have some model where whatever your auth is, when it's given, what are its values? What are its, you know, its scopes? It's definitely an important space, guys.
Brandon, is this something that you would want to either comment on, something like the issue 240 or 110, or tease out into even taking a stab at this?
I can poke around those issues and drop a few comments. I was just about to say, I don't think I have enough bandwidth to recommend a new working group quite yet. I don't know if that's going to be required for something like this or not.
I don't know. Like at this point, I think yeah, I'm two ways. I'm like, it's almost like one of those things that there's been a few items brought into the spec or specs, not just like the distribution image runtime, that was basically like, this is already how it is. And we're basically defining the behaviors. And then even like putting a little ribbon around this, these are the spots where things kind of differ, you know, as we've found, of like, you know, generally this is how it is, but this is the spots where there's gray area or rough edges. And then once it's there, then it's like either easier for folks to get a better understanding of it, or to say, you know, something needs to be fixed. And it like, because I think part of it is that when it's not specified, most, services like, Azure, AWS, GCP, they know what does or doesn't work with their tools, and they don't want to like break their customers. And if it's not defined, then they're not, just like venture to change it and like potentially break their customers. Who cares if it like they need that kind of assurance to say, oh, actually, this would not just not break our customers, but it would also enable other use cases with like known tools. But when it's not written down, there's nothing for them to back that up with. So being able to even point out like, here's where it does or doesn't work, even if it's like we get some part merged, and in this in the issue, it's teased out of like, here's the differences still that are yet to be ironed out. And it allows a lot of those different implementations or services to say like where the differences are, and like have more assurance that they could unify and not break their customers and enable other tools.
So is this something we want to extend distribution spec with another file? It's just auth.md over there.
Another file versus inline. I'm two ways about it.
It's, from my experience, it's complicated enough. I don't think it's going to fit nicely inlined.
There'll probably
Sadly.
be something inline saying, here's, more information.
Look over here.
But
Yeah. Yeah, I'll dig through some of those open issues out there and see what kind of feedback. This is relatively fresh in my head. I've had a lot of people hit me and say, hey, your code doesn't work for this case, it doesn't work for that case. And I keep realizing all the different scenarios that are out there that are not easy to work around.
I can help you, Brandon, as well on this. Insofar
Yeah.
as adding additional patterns that we're already using.
Yeah.
But
I was giving
beyond
Vince
the-
time to, I was giving
beyond the
Vince time to type the
root has
notes.
login, right? Root has login, therefore root may pull. Beyond that, we've got other patterns that we need to employ as well, or just describe, and I can help there.
Yeah. I've been seeing a lot of them just because I'm copying images between, and I'm also trying to make long-term clients. And boy, that opens up a whole nother can of worms when you think of a long-term client that gets a password once and then reuses that for however long it's been running.
Yep.
Especially when you have credential helpers, that adds yet another complexity there.
Yep. Yeah, we have a couple of holes or disconnects, if you will.
Yeah.
okay, what? Were you about to say something? I heard you say you were waiting on me.
No. I was just being quiet for a little bit to let you type. Figure it's easier typing when people aren't chatting about very interesting things in the background.
ADD has its benefits sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's all I got to turn a no agenda meeting into a bunch of discussion topics.
Yeah. Anybody else have OCI topics? Cool. Good seeing you.
I really hope that made it into the video and that it wasn't focused on me and missing your dancing.
Nope. Vince was alive.
So you get 20 minutes back before your next meeting.
Awesome.
Good seeing you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.